So let's talk about NCT Hollywood. SM has said that in partnership with MGM Television and a producer of previous shows like The Voice, they will be developing a new competition show, which will apparently be called K-Pop Goes Hollywood, to find one new member of NCT for the eventual subunit of NCT called NCT Hollywood. In terms of the actual audition, it will be open to male Americans aged 13 to 25, of whom 21 will be selected to be trained at SM's campus, is what they call it, in Seoul. I think the idea is essentially the show will run with Lee Soo-man as producer and NCT members as mentors. Let's start off by just talking about the audition itself first. So I feel like in general, when it comes to audition shows, there are always some good and some bad parts to it. But in general, they're pretty good fun, right? Because they lift the veil on the trainee process,
Right.
especially when it comes to K-pop. And it's going to be interesting to see who's picked out to go to Seoul in the first place, especially since they must be pretty talented to begin with. And then I'm also just excited to see how the NCT members will work as mentors on that show. I think there's possibility for some kind of like extra drama or spice or kind of like even cringiness to be worked in there, but I'm kind of here for that. You know, I really don't mind that. And personally, I'm just really excited to see Lee Soo-man on TV.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I'm also very excited for this because I also love, quote, reality TV shows. It is exciting to see artists as performers then kind of go into the role of mentor and see maybe what different sides or colors come out for them, and also gives them a chance to kind of flex their skills and illuminate some of the trainee system, which is maybe not always very transparent. I wonder if the show is actually going to give an authentic look at that, or if in virtue of the fact that it is a reality TV show, maybe it's not the exact same experience as someone like Tae or Johnny or like third generation K-pop members went through. I also wonder how it might change because it's co-produced by an American entertainment company with different notions of maybe what reality TV or what entertainment is going to look like in the end.
I think that's a really good point. I think SM's really going to water everything down in terms of the trainee process because, to provide some context, right, like SM has been kind of notorious for not doing audition shows or these kind of reality shows to create their groups. Like JYP's done it, YG's done it, a bunch of other groups have done it. The only thing is that SM used to be part of a Korean kind of variety show, audition show called K-Pop Star, but they were the winner. You know, they could have the option of going to any of these big entertainment companies, but SM actually later on pulled out of it, saying that they would prefer to just focus on the trainees that they have themselves. And to be completely honest, like a lot of people say that to get into SM, that's probably more difficult than even performing well in an audition show.
Right.
So considering that SM has very much kind of had a tight, locked, secretive process when it comes to creating their groups, it's interesting that they're deciding to showcase it in this way. I feel like it's just going to be a very small sliver of the pie. For instance, like it's very different when you're training for a couple of weeks versus you're training for like 5+ years like Johnny was, right? So yeah, I think it'll just be enough for us to hopefully get a glimpse into it, but to still keep things lighthearted and like more focused on NCT rather than like the nuts and bolts of how SM works.
I'm also very interested to see what happens if you have, let's say, like a fan favorite member, like someone that the audience really clings to, but they don't actually go very far in the competition. Because in some ways, it's a great opportunity, this show, for early emotional attachment to certain members, which would be very special as like a fan, right? To see that person go through this whole stage.
I think what is smart about SM is that they're literally just saying, we are going to choose one winner who will become a new NCT member. So then the kind of criteria is pretty clear. It's pretty much saying like SM has to like them, otherwise they won't make it. So I wonder how much of like the general public's opinion will be in line with like Lee Soo-man's opinion, you know? So that's kind of spicy.
For sure. I'm also excited to see it as an opportunity to use it as another case where you compare what the public looks for and admires maybe in an idol and what the Lee Soo-man and the executive C-suite might look for in a person. Because oftentimes, I'd say actually more often, those don't always overlap.
Absolutely.
So that'll be exciting. I'm also interested to see if there is a cultural difference between the male Americans and their multinational mentors and how that will be facilitated. Like, will they all have to speak Korean? Will there be translators there?
This is actually stressing me out. Like, it's giving me social anxiety.
Oh no!
Just in the sense, it's like they're choosing these American guys, but what does American even mean? Are they going to have an East Asian ethnic background, which is usually what a lot of these kind of quote-unquote foreign members of Korean bands are? Or are they just going to be American guys who have no cultural background in Korea whatsoever? So I think that'll be very interesting to see, like not only within interactions with the members themselves, but in terms of what the future unit will look like, and also in terms of how Korean fans will react versus American or international fans. Like I can easily see there being a clear difference between a member that the Korean audience might prefer versus what an American audience. We can talk about reactions among fans because I think it's interesting because for 2020, fans were like, I don't know how I'm going to embrace new members, but then Sungchan and Shotaro came along and then people are now very happy with them. Like, is that going to happen again with NCT Hollywood? Is something else going to happen? Who knows?
So interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's so hard to imagine how fans and people might react based on how little we have on this production.
I know.
I will say on a personal front, when Sungchan and Shotaro were like randomly announced and just appeared in the Resonance promotions, like there was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of what is going on. There was a lot of trepidation, but you know, we learned to love them, right? And I kind of think that there is still room in the heart of the fans to maybe love a new group, depending on how it's executed, right? So I think there's hope in that way. And I also think to a certain extent, like this is something I think we'll just have to accept being NCT fans. It limitlessly expands.
So what do you think about having a US-based NCT unit?
Okay, so I see this as what Lee Soo-man promised when he proposed NCT to the world and to his investment venture capitalists. So like this is just one of the other instantiations of this Hallyu wave that is going to be localized in a different region. And I also think that the idea of a US-based unit is exciting because it's quite novel, right? It hasn't really been attempted before by other Korean production companies, or if it was, then it wasn't backed with the same amount of resource of one of these like big three production companies, and the other two are YG and JYP Entertainment. So that's exciting, just like on an intellectual level.
I think it's interesting because it was bound to happen, especially as K-pop was growing so much and you had so many K-pop groups domestically that were doing well overseas. Now it's turned to just see how that system would work overseas. I think it's really interesting, and I think you have to treat it as a fun project. Otherwise, it can just be too much and too intense as a fan, is what I'm thinking. So I think it's fine as long as they don't falter with production quality and group chemistry.
Yeah.
Who knows, like NCT Hollywood itself could be just great noise marketing for the rest of NCT, or it can turn off a lot of the members of the general public, but I think the appetite is there. It's just about how well SM executes it. And in terms of 127, because, you know, we know that 127 has actively promoted in the US too, I think they're fine. I think they still have their share of the market, but I do think it's really important that they get more serious domestic success and promotions to not put them in an awkward situation where they're more popular overseas, but they're not like necessarily the explicitly US-based unit, stuff like that. Let's talk about NCT-U because they will be back. Who knows in what capacity? It could be just as part of NCT 2021. It could be like a casual SM Station release. But is there a kind of dream NCT-U unit that you have in mind that you'd love to see perform?
Yes, I have a vision for one a cappella unit, right? Or like one just dance unit. There is no song, it's just dance. Or like one, you know, just modeling unit. But in each of the units, you would see members who aren't typically used for those roles. So for example, in the a cappella unit, I mean, Jungwoo is one singer that I am just dying to hear in his full glory. Yang Yang, I'm also very excited for. Ten, because I think I just love his vocal color. And he is transitioning more into a vocal base, and then also Jisun. I just basically went for the singers whose tones I really love and I thought could work well together. So that's kind of my vision. And then similarly in the dance unit, you'd have people that don't normally get the center stage for dance, but are quite talented. Like Xiao Jun's one of those members that really pop out to me immediately. And then for modeling, like I want to see like Haechan model. I mean, like I think I want to see his own creation for his own shoot because he knows how like to make himself look good.
He knows how to work it. Anyways, for me, I think it's without a doubt band concept, much like the Without You release from back in 2016, because it's one of my favorite NCT-U units. I really
Okay.
realized it was the time to bring it back when I watched the Beyond live concert with Jaehyun, Do Young-tae, and Kun singing the song together. I also think the fans have kind of been dying for like a Utah Japanese rock concept. But you know, that's another thing altogether. But for me, anything that goes for like a more band-like, dare I say, less neo sound, I think that would be really enjoyable for the fans and a great addition to their discography. I would love to see a Haechan and Ten runway show. I don't need anybody else.
Ooh,
Just like the members
just
with
the
the
two.
attitude and the smize, like
the smolder, like unbelievable.
yeah, the smolder. I think they would have so much fun too.
I wonder if they do drag
10, yes, like in his sleep. I feel like
in a heartbeat.
yeah.
We'll just have like throw all 7 of the wavy members as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Princess Party.
Oh my
Princess
God.
Party.
Okay, shall we talk about the Kwangya storyline as part of the SM cultural universe?
So, the man promised NCT would be limitless and expanding. We just didn't know then that they would also be expanding into the virtual space. So, in this way, I think it's actually consistent. I think it's consistent. I think this is every media company's dream to utilize all platforms available to them. Like Disney is the biggest success for this, right? They are in movies, they're in television, they're in books, toys, and most kind of ludicrously, they're in theme parks. So, it's natural for me to see an entertainment company want to break into these assets. But at the same time, it's kind of unprecedented to see an entertainment company that works with actual people. I use the example of Mark Lee. Like in Disney, you can have 17 or however many Disney parks there are, like princesses running about, right? You can have 17 Cinderellas, right? There's only one physical Mark Lee, right? What are you going to spatially interact with? I don't think SM will go here, but who knows? Like it is great to get your hands on some land assets as a company, right?
I mean, they're trying to do hotels, I think, where you can interact with your idols in a virtual space.
Wow. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, there is an example of that. So, like, if you have a precedent built up in a storyline like Kwangya, then at least it's a bit of an easier transition.
It's like a good segue.
It's a good segue.
For SM to expand into other kind of projects.
Exactly. It's like the lore bit. You know, you build up the lore to convince people of the current world order.
Yeah. But hey, how about in the virtual world?
Right. In the virtual world, you're in your homes. It's COVID, Delta variant, Lambda variant. Great. You can see Mark Lee in virtual space.
Yeah. Well, so I guess maybe we should give a bit of background on the Kwangya thing, whatever we want to call it. So Kwangya loosely translates to kind of a magical field, a magical garden in English. And it's what SM's really been pushing in their songs and their lore with aespa. So you might have heard it a lot in aespa songs, and more recently in NCT Dream's Hello Future, they also reference it. It seems to kind of be just like this virtual space that SM has created where their artists interact with God knows who. But anyways, with aespa, it's interesting because they've really made their lore a central part of their entire discography, which hasn't necessarily been the case with NCT or with previous groups like EXO. Like they weren't singing about their superpowers necessarily, right? But aespa, they're actively singing about Kwangya and the rest of their lore. So for me personally, if it's mentioned a few times in a song, I guess it's harmless, though at worst it can be a bit annoying because it's like, SM, can you please like get over yourself with this ridiculous application of a random word? Yeah, with this product placement. So for me, for the most part, it's harmless as it exists right now. But if SM uses them in like some mediocre venture into VR or other spaces, I think I'll be genuinely annoyed. Like we already have to deal with the idea that is neo-culture technology as it is. To have to deal with the rest of this SM cultural universe that they're trying to use, it's just a lot. So I respect it from a business point of view, but from a fan, if it fails in execution, I think I'll be frustrated.
This is a great point. I think the success of this actually does hinge on the technology. Like if it's hampering, if it's annoying, like we'll just we won't throw our phones out the window, but like we will take all of our rage out on Lee Soo-man, right? But if the technology is actually very smooth, and like, I don't know, you could watch a music video with Jaehyun, or like Jaehyun's music video at the same time in the Kwangya, like as a fan, like 100% you'd go for that, right? So I think the technology point will be key, and it reminds me of that interesting point you raised about what SM's doing with their money. Do you want to share it with us?
Yeah, so I mean, to kind of wrap up the video, we do want to generally talk about Lee Soo-man's mastermind, what his master plan plan is overall. And most recently, there have been rumors that Lee Soo-man will be selling at least some of his shares in SM, which sit at around 18%, I think, which is the largest kind of group of shares that anybody has in SM. So apparently he doesn't intend on passing it down to his children. So instead, he wants to sell it to an entertainment or media company for the sake of SM's future. There are some big names out there, but I think what's also interesting is that there's some rumors saying that he might sell it to a tech company to literally just give him the infrastructure to create better content, right? Because I mean, we've all seen aespa's kind of virtual members. They could look better, honestly.
Yeah.
And if SM wants to be able to sell any of this in a convincing fashion, then they do need that extra support. So we'll see. We'll see what he decides to do with some of his shares, but I think it is pretty indicative that he's very set on going into the VR space.
As all media people are.
Yeah, for real.
The whole master plan is probably a lot less cohesive than it might look like from the outside.
That's a great point.
I'd say you and I are straddling a space of like pure fan reception, the chaos and confusion that ensues with being in this ever-moving, ever-changing, constantly new space with clear marketing ambitions behind it, and then going into a place of like intellectualism to try and make sense of it in the only thread that does make sense, which is like, where is the money flowing?
Yeah.
He might know something like he wants to break into the US or Chinese markets, but he might not necessarily know how.
Yeah.
And directed by Lee Soo-man, will try in various different methods to future-proof the company. And the ideal future-proofing is holding really diverse assets and localizing the experience, because then it's really rooted in like a given culture, right? And a given audience. So doing this whole VR bent makes absolute sense. It lasts longer.
I think for me, I'm just really wondering how SM plans on squeezing all of these plans into the remainder of 2021. If they're able to do that in a successful manner, both creatively and financially, then I think we'll once again be applauding the company for their great vision, but we'll just have to wait and see, I guess. And NCT always has to walk that fine line that we refer to in terms of providing both quality and quantity.
Yes, my hat's off to head of logistics or whoever schedules for this production company and makes all of their ventures happen.